Well, Jim went live, so I thought the rest of us needed to too.
Here I am also.
Need to unmute myself.
Hey.
Hey.
Nice background there, Todd.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
you know, it's under control, so it's not a big deal.
I thought maybe you were like Nicolas Cage or something.
No, you know, it's just the country's on fire, so I thought I'd go live to the inferno.
All right. Well, I want to welcome everyone to Pints and Politics. I'm Erin Jordan. I'm the Gazette's investigative reporter and the moderator for tonight's event. So last time we were here on Zoom, it was June 4th, and the general election was months and months away, and seemed like, you know, a lot could happen, and a lot has happened. So now it's less than 6 weeks away. Before we get into that and some topics along national, state, and local politics, I want to introduce our panelists for tonight. First, we have Gazette's editorial and insights editor, Todd Dorman, Gazette columnist, Adam Sullivan,
Hi.
And Gazette political reporter, James Lynch. So we've gotten at least one question this week through email, and others can be submitted through Zoom. So Adam had to point out to me, it's a little gray box to the left of your video, has a live label on it, and you can only submit these questions through gazette.com. You should be viewing the link there, as opposed to, I don't think you can submit questions if you're just watching it on YouTube.
That's right. I just want to clarify. Yeah, so at thegazette.com, there's a link on the homepage with our faces on it, I believe. And then right next to the video, you can submit questions there.
Great. So I will start off with just the big event of this last week. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died last Friday at the age of 87 after serving, I think if I did the math right, 27 years on the US Supreme Court. She was a vocal advocate for gender equity, workers' rights, and the separation of church and state. And she voted on so many key decisions, including the 2015 ruling allowing same-sex marriage. So I wanted to ask the panelists, as you've been reading about RBG this week and her accomplishments, what is one thing you learned that surprised you, something you didn't know before?
I didn't realize she was so small. I knew she was petite, but I didn't know she was so small. No, I think, you know, I really hadn't read a lot about her background and how her father was an immigrant, and I guess her mother said she was conceived in the old world and born in the new world. And in a lot of ways, I think Ginsburg's life is very emblematic of the time in which she grew up in. You know, I think everyone's familiar with the sort of the glass ceilings she broke in her career, and I think it's really it's sort of an uplifting story, really, how she came from very humble beginnings and worked very hard, and you know, sort of embodied the American dream, and especially for women of her generation and following generations.
I obviously enjoyed going back and reading libertarian retrospectives, because she, you know, progressive jurists have, you know, are libertarian on at least half the issues in general, and she had some, not only took the what would be called the correct libertarian position in a lot of cases throughout the years, but also she wrote a lot of opinions that were, you know, very strong in that regard on property rights cases. So there's a couple interesting cases with eminent domain, things like that, that she had very strong opinions on. So she's someone who, I mean, is even in the very hyper-partisan way that that we think about the courts today, she's someone that I think is still respected by people on both sides. And she had a long enough legal career. She took on enough issues that I think there's a lot of things in her writings that anyone can find to appreciate.
Well, and it was unfortunate for her, of course, at the time that you know, even though she was first in her class at Harvard and then transferred to Columbia and was, you know, this outstanding law student, legal scholar. She couldn't get a job at any, law firms that she applied to in New York City, and ended up teaching. And I think if she had gotten a job, maybe the history would have been different. But because she started teaching and got into the issues that were, the issues around gender equality and equality beyond gender, it's that those were sort of fomenting at that time in that period of history, and so it actually turned out well that she became a teacher and a litigant in a lot of these lawsuits, and taught a lot of students who ended up being pretty key figures in a lot of these drives to expand equal protection under the law.
It's interesting to me, the accolades that we've heard this week from rather conservative voices, and our historian here at the Gazette, Diane Langton, sent me a story from 1993, Chuck Grassley saying Ginsburg is a Democrat that even conservatives can like. I'm tempted to say, my, how the times have changed, but
yeah.
he had nice words for her this week. But yeah, I don't think that philosophy or that sentiment will be seen in the next few weeks.
So, and speaking of that, Ginsburg's death kind of set in motion this dispute over whether President Trump should be able to appoint her successor, or whether that decision should wait to see who wins the November 3rd election. James, you talked this week to Senator Grassley, whose views on whether this sort of timeline have changed since, I think 2016. I wondered if you could tell us about that conversation.
Well, obviously, as people recall, in 2016, he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and he said voters should be given a voice in this matter. And so he didn't have hearings on Merrick Garland, President Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court, to fill the vacancy created by Justice Scalia's death. And it was very hotly contested at the time. Democrats wanted to have hearings and wanted to confirm Obama's nominee. Republicans refused. It was like 10 months of vacancy on the court. And then when Trump was elected, Republicans confirmed Neil Gorsuch. Now it's the case of sort of the shoe is on the other foot, and everybody has taken the opposite position. Grassley said, I'm not chairman, so it's not up to me, which is true. It's basically up to Senate Majority Leader McConnell and Judiciary Chairman Graham, whether they're going to have hearings. And Grassley, has been pushing back on this argument that he's a hypocrite because now he's said he would participate in hearings. Yeah, everybody has switched sides in this fight.
I think it's a pretty flimsy rationale that Grassley's offering. So he says that, that he, as Judiciary Chairman, he wouldn't do it, but that as a member of the Senate and as a member of the majority party, that he's fine with it. So I think we're basically at a place where anything that's technically legal is something that politicians are going to find it acceptable to do. And it's been striking. I think that's probably always been their calculation, or has been in the last several years at least. But it was striking with the Supreme Court to see politicians put that in plain terms and say that, no, actually, we're not trying to justify this based on any principle. We're just saying that we think that the other guys would do it too. You see a somewhat similar calculus with court packing by Democrats. So basically saying, well, no, we know that it's probably not a good idea, but those guys went that low before, so we have to respond in kind. So I guess maybe it's good that now that politicians are finally being transparent and saying that, actually, that it's just a totally cynical partisan calculation, but it was still a little bit unnerving to see.
Well, and what Grassley said in 2016, because I'm at home, I have a computer screen and I can look at it. A lifetime appointment that could dramatically impact individual freedoms and change the direction of the court for at least a generation is too important to get bogged down in politics. The American people shouldn't be denied a voice. And that's exactly what's happening now. I know the senator and Senator Ernst have pleaded that they're not hypocrites, but it's pretty shameful hypocrisy to apply one set of rules to a Democratic president and another set of rules to a Republican president. And especially in this case with, as much as Merrick Garland might have changed the court or altered the balance of power, this appointment promises to hand conservatives a big majority for a generation, and that's a much bigger deal than the Garland appointment was. So, yeah, it's good that they're being transparently hypocritical, I guess. But I mean, I guess this is the politics that we have right now. And as far as Democrats talking about packing the court and stuff, we're a ways from seeing whether that's actually going to happen. But this about face, setting a new set of rules on this is happening right in front of us, and it's sad and maddening.
So we have a question from a participant online who says, rumor has it the Democrats are going to introduce a bill limiting Supreme Court justices to an 18-year term. Would you guys care to address that? What do you think about that idea?
That third round, I've heard a couple other ideas of how you would reform the court. The big idea is that it shouldn't be so do or die to have a Supreme Court nomination. It seems it's hard to imagine that you'd have, certainly for a required constitutional amendment, it's hard to see folks coming together on that in the near future. I don't know quite what the legal strategies would be short of a constitutional amendment, but you certainly can see people trying to find some way to change the way we do Supreme Court nominations, because the way we're doing them now is not working out very well.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about some sort of limits, whether it's 18 years or I've heard 20 or, but I think what we've seen, and Ginsburg in some ways is an example of it, as somebody elderly in poor health, and I think it's legitimate to ask, are these people who should be deciding the future of our legal system, and not to pick on her, but you look at the court and there have been some elderly people on there, and I guess you wonder if a lifetime appointment is the best way. I mean, I think the argument for a lifetime appointment is these people are they're there, they don't have to worry about re-election, like, for example, state judges. But at the same time, 25 years on the court, maybe you lose touch with what's really happening in American life. You get a pretty narrow, your world can narrow when you're in a position like that for a long time. And I think there's some idea that, let's put a term limit there, 18 years, whatever, and sort of reduce the pressure that comes with a lifetime appointment, and the pressure on the Senate. The stakes are pretty high on every one of these appointments. And I would also say that, when you look at the situation right now where you have a president who probably will make 3 appointments to the court, and given all the other federal judicial positions that have been filled, there's going to be a conservative philosophy on the courts for 2, 3, 4 decades from now. And I don't know that we want sort of one party rule on the courts any more than we want one party rule in Congress.
Although I'm not 100%, at least with the Supreme Court, I'm not 100% certain that this would solve a lot. I mean, even with term limits, you're still going to have court openings come at politically sensitive moments. I mean, it just seems like anymore that every moment is politically sensitive in some way. So even if you have an 18 or a 20 year, I mean, it's gonna come up, perhaps when a president's on the ballot, or unless they figure out a way to stagger those terms so that you don't have terms ending in a presidential election year, which I suppose could help. But yeah, I mean, there are lots of reforms being thrown out there. There are lots of, Democrats like, as I wrote the other day, I mean, this is sort of, we're in this revenge spiral now. We had the Merrick Garland fiasco, and now we've got this, and Democrats are saying, well, we're going to add, some Democrats are saying we're going to add Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia as states, where we'll have 4 more Democratic senators potentially, and hey, maybe we should pack the court and add, a few more members to as revenge sort of for the Garland hold. So, I mean, and all of this is dependent on, of course, who controls the Senate, which we're going to decide in November.
So along those lines, with the election coming up, how do you think Ginsburg's death is going to mobilize voters? Will it?
Great for fundraising. Everybody is fundraising off her death.
Some people very quickly.
Yeah, some people were within the hours, within the day. Yeah, we saw that right here in Iowa with the Senate campaigns. So I think it's hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how this is going to mobilize Trump's base. I'm not sure he's having problems mobilizing his base. I think Trump's challenge is mobilizing more than his base. He needs more than his base to win this election. Certainly, it's fired up a lot of people. Certainly, a lot of people are going to open their pocketbooks and make contributions to the parties and the candidates and various interest groups. In the long run, it just, I think it mostly drives anxiety and tension.
Yeah, I think the bases are pretty mobilized. If anything, I mean, it kind of shows. I mean, I think if the Republican Senate leaders thought Trump was going to win, they might have gone ahead and waited. But I think it shows that they're worried that he's not going to win. That's why they're moving ahead before the election. So in a way, they're actually playing a card that Trump could play, and say, hey, if I don't get elected, I'm not going to fill this seat. Elect me and I will. But they're going to go ahead and do it before the election. So I think it'll still motivate his base, and obviously Democrats and their voters are upset at how this is being conducted. So I think we've seen anecdotal reports on both sides that folks are being motivated to vote.
I think it's more interesting on the Senate level. Obviously, senators have to take a stance on this, and so that's a controversial position. Obviously, our Senator Ernst is up for re-election, and she's going along with the nomination confirmation process. And so that's, one more thing that people can hit her on, and that maybe motivates people to vote against her, even if they already weren't going to vote for the president, but maybe they would have entertained voting for the Republican senator or Republican members of the U.S. House. This could be one thing that puts them over the top and just supporting Democrats. On the other hand, maybe I don't know. It's easy for me to see how people get fired up about this kind of thing on either side. So who knows what happens.
Well, and this seat is seen as pivotal in the fight over, abortion and other issues along those lines. Joni Ernst in the latest Iowa poll already is trailing by a long shot among women voters. And I don't think this is her taking the stance that she's taken is going to bring any of those women back.
The strategy the Republicans are taking makes me wonder if Mitch McConnell hasn't already said we've lost the White House. We're going to bet everything on the Supreme Court. He's got to be worried about whether or not he'll be majority leader next year.
Yeah.
And it just seems like they're saying, okay, we can't hold Congress, so we're going to hold the court. We're going to create a court that is going to carry out conservative judicial philosophy for 40 years. And like you said, Todd, if he felt confident about holding the Senate and holding the White House, they could take the high road. But not many people in politics these days are taking the high road.
There is no.
It's pretty lonely out there.
The high road's closed.
Yeah, it's under construction.
The derecho probably put some tree debris there.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I wanted to ask you guys, Todd, you mentioned the Iowa poll that came out recently. So earlier this week, the numbers came out showing President Trump and Democrat Joe Biden tied in Iowa with 47% of likely voters here supporting each candidate. But Todd, I thought it was interesting you wrote about how this breaks down by gender. I was hoping you could explain that.
Yeah, well, they're 47-47 in the Iowa poll, Trump and Biden locked up. But Biden has a 20-point lead among women, and Trump has a 21-point lead among men. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously the Trump presidency has been, well, and Trump himself have been criticized for the things that he's said and bragging about sexual assault in the campaign in 2016 and all of the other reasons that Trump has sort of soured on women voters. And the men, I speculated maybe it was the boat parades and the hats. There's a lot of polling out there though that showed that there's men have been becoming more Republican over a long period of time. That accelerated through 2016. There was also a Washington Post story about a study by a couple of New York University researchers who suggested that Trump did really well in places where there were more Google searches for things like erectile dysfunction and hair loss. And I leave you to draw your own conclusions about that, but there's a lot of questions out there as to why the gender gap has widened as much of it as it has, and maybe there are a lot of husbands and wives that aren't talking to each other as the election gets closer.
Or they have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, loudly.
So kind of sticking with the Iowa poll, I know you had mentioned that Teresa Greenfield has a narrow lead over Joni Ernst in the Senate race. I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think is going to shape this race in the final 6 weeks? Are we going to get any new surprises? I don't know when we have debates coming up. What should people be looking for?
There are debates. I don't remember the dates right now, but there are debates coming up. I'm not sure. I think if there is any new issue, it will be a surprise. I mean, they both talked about pretty much anything that's sort of on the agenda by this point in the campaign. I don't know what's going to make people change their mind about this. It's very close. This race has, we've seen polls all summer that have put, the lead has gone back and forth, you might say, in those polls. The Des Moines Register poll had, as Todd mentioned, has Greenfield out ahead, which this is really interesting from the standpoint that the incumbent is trailing, and Ernst won, I guess you would say handily, maybe 6 years ago. If you had asked me a year ago or 2 years ago, I would say that I thought Joni Ernst could be beat, but I didn't expect it to happen. So this is, in some ways, is surprising that it's this close. That someone who is basically an unknown candidate, a first-time candidate, is being this successful, which may say a whole lot about the way campaigns are run these days and where candidates get their support. But that's that's another topic.
Well, I think Greenfield has hammered the healthcare issue a lot and will continue to do that. Just sort of arguing that Ernst has voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and then that would, take away coverage from people with existing conditions. That's been a constant theme. They're still hammering on the fact that Ernst sort of seemed to buy into the idea that hospitals might be inflating COVID cases because they would get extra money. I don't think that sat well with a lot of folks, especially healthcare workers. So those are some of the themes. I don't know that there'll be a surprise. I think Ernst will still try to portray Greenfield as an unfeeling businesswoman who evicted small businesses from a strip mall. She'll also try to portray her as extreme. And I mean, we've heard lots of Republicans yelling socialism at their opponents, and I think that will continue. But this does seem like one of those races that's slipping away for an incumbent. Now the polls are all within the margin of error, so we don't know for sure. But it just, you could tell in 2016 that Bruce Braley was not going to do it at about this point, and it's beginning to feel like maybe Joni Ernst is in more trouble. And I agree with James. I mean, I thought that this would be a safe seat. I thought she would win a second term fairly easily, but I think her ties to Trump have hurt her with some segments of voters that she won over in 2014.
I think it goes show you how much Trump has dragged down Republicans. That, you know, her association with Trump and Trump, you know, mentioning her favorably hasn't really helped her. You know, Republicans love it every time, you know, the president says she's relentless on, you know, biofuels or something like that, but it's not helping her. And I mean, we're seeing this basically all over the country where Republican incumbents are in trouble. The association with the president is just not helping, and
Well,
he's dragging everybody down.
and I think it's telling that if you see her mailers, Ernst's mailers, and some of her web ads right now, she's portraying herself as one of the most bipartisan members of the Senate.
Right.
Is obviously she's trying to you know, give herself a different identity than someone that, you know, is basically sticking with Trump all the time. She's trying to let voters know that she's works across the aisle, which is an interesting late bid.
Adam, what were you going to say?
Oh, I don't know. I'm good.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you first crack at the next one.
Oh, good.
So speaking of debates, I know there's a debate at 7 tonight. So if you want to have like a, you know, politics night, you can watch that debate on Iowa Public Television between Rita Hart and Marionette Miller Meeks, who are competing to represent Iowa's 2nd congressional district. And Adam, since you live in that district, what issues do you think might come up at the debate tonight?
I think the same federal issues that you've seen on every in all the discussions we have. So I think healthcare is a big issue, foreign policy, trade policy, you know, the ways that basically all the issues that Trump has provoked or neglected to address in his first 4 years in office. So that race seems to me is not getting certainly not as much attention as the Senate race, which is understandable, but not even as much attention as the first district race. But I think it is very competitive. The Des Moines Register poll recently showed that all the races in Iowa actually are somewhat competitive, which was surprising actually. But so I don't know. I haven't seen either candidate necessarily pull ahead. It's been a weird campaign year, so you don't have some of the usual indicators of how a campaign is going.
Well, we don't have as many events, and I think that's hard because you're not seeing these people make their talking points every other day. You know, it's
right.
It's a lot more polished in terms of what they're putting out on, you know, commercials and YouTube and that kind of thing.
Yeah, this 2nd district race has also, I guess, been a little bit maybe less negative than the Senate race and the 2nd district race, which are have had a lot of personal attacks, and in the in the 1st district race and the Senate race. But the 2nd district race, the Southeast Iowa, has a current and a former state senator who have both run for higher office before, and they both have long records. They both have a few things that they've each been dinged about, but for the most part, I think that they are respected, appreciated policymakers. So I would hope that the debate will be, you know, pretty substantive, and I don't think that you'll see a lot of you know, about you trotting out someone's business history and things like that. I don't think that's where this race is going.
So I think they have
three or four.
They have 3 or 4 debates, don't they, Adam? I know they've got it.
They've agreed to more than one. I know. I don't know what the number is.
So the other congressional race in Eastern Iowa that Adam mentioned in the 1st district between incumbent Democrat Abby Finkenauer and Republican Ashley Hinson. So both of them live in Cedar Rapids area, which was, you know, probably the hardest hit by the August 10th derecho. I wanted to see what you guys thought about how the storm has maybe changed the campaign conversations, or maybe just even how they're campaigning, and if that's for the better or worse in terms of what voters are learning.
It gives both candidates an opportunity to say that they went out and volunteered for storm recovery, which is not, you know, that's not a storm recovery policy. I don't know how useful that is. It's good, you know, everyone ought to do that. But Representative Finkenauer, you know, actually is in Congress now, so she gets to, you know, she advocates for, you know, FEMA protections and things like that, so she can use that. Representative Hinson is, again, State Representative Hinson is since she's friends with the governing party right now, she had a seat at the table when the president came to visit Cedar Rapids. So I guess she can use that to say that she was, she helped in the response for it. So I think that it is, I don't know if it's an issue that motivates people as, a matter of public policy, but it's probably an issue that frustrated people. People perceive the response to be bad from all levels of government. So it's easy to see how they might take it out on the powers that be or against the, like I said, the governing party.
I think it's given both candidates an issue that they can relate to and the voters relate to. Sometimes when we talk about healthcare or agricultural policy or the RFS, it seems a little distant. But especially in the Cedar Rapids area, when you talk about derecho and the FEMA response, people know what you're talking about and they can relate whether they had a good experience or a bad experience. I don't think anybody had a good experience, but they have something to base it on. Whereas with other issues, it's not as personal. They weren't affected so directly. So I think it's an advantage to both of them.
Now, do they have, I know they've had at least one debate so far. Do they have another one coming up that you guys are aware of?
Not yet. The Hinson campaign is pushing hard to get more debates, but the Finkenauer campaign has not agreed to a second debate.
Their friends are here watching us now because they've submitted several questions asking us about why there's not more debates in the first district. So
it's unfortunate that there aren't. But.
Yeah, there should be. They sent what was it? What was the chicken's name that they
Lefty
sent?
Chickenauer.
Lefty Chickenauer, who was supposed to shame Abby Finkenauer into agreeing to debates. We haven't had much luck getting the Hinson campaign to meet with the editorial board, so maybe we'll invite Lefty Chickenauer to see if he'll sit down with us. Bring us extra crispy, please, or I don't know, maybe original recipe. I don't know.
It's an interesting issue. There's, variously in Iowa politics, there's been a candidate from one part or the other won't agree to either one or many debates. I think a lot of, they should do several debates. I think for a U.S. House candidate, I think 3 is not too many to ask, that you would do those in different parts of the district. In Iowa, we have these very segmented media districts, television districts. And so, to get on all the TV shows. And so I think as a general rule, I think that, they ought to do 3.
Well, and they should. And I guess I would feel more strongly about if the debates, the formats we have for debates are sort of lacking and we really don't get to see, they're just formats that allow candidates to sort of easily fall into their talking points, which is, I think, what we've seen in a lot of debates over the last few years. And we don't really get to drill down into issues or get away from just sort of the comfortable things that they're talking about. So I'd like to see more debates and I'd like to see better debates, but the campaigns like to have some influence over the format, and they of course want something that's not gonna, they don't want to perform completely without a net, which that's how candidates get into trouble.
So in some American cities, Black Lives Matter protests are still happening nightly in months after the murder of George Floyd. I wondered, I know that you guys have been meeting with candidates for office. I wondered what you've been hearing from some of them, if there's about the status of reform efforts in Eastern Iowa or new ideas for social justice.
Yeah, so we've been meeting with candidates for federal and state office as an editorial board, mostly with Democrats. The vast majority of Republicans didn't agree to meet with us, but so I got to ask several Democrats about police reform. At the federal level, Democrats have an interest in kind of taking a look at qualified immunity. I don't know if they really want to scrap it altogether. That's one of the big demands of racial justice protesters. One thing I asked them all about was about drug task forces, which are basically the federal government gives resources and sometimes even personnel and equipment to local departments so they can go bust up drug crimes, but it's not good. It's bad drug enforcement. It brings big SWAT team kind of enforcement to communities. I asked candidates about that, and almost no one had even heard that was a thing actually, which was disappointing because I think drug enforcement is a key part of the police reform movement that we're talking about right now. So I think that it's being talked about a lot, but I don't know that policymakers are really prepared to take positions on the nitty-gritty details of what it would take to do meaningful police reform. So that's on the federal level. On the state level, they passed pretty much a decent start bill last year. I don't know that that's going to be a top issue for legislators going in this year. I don't know that we'll see how the House and the Senate majorities shake out after the elections this November, but it's not necessarily a top of mind issue from candidates that we heard of to do additional law enforcement reform.
Well, I think the Democrats, the legislative Democrats we talked to were, seemed to be pretty interested in some sort of either decriminalizing marijuana. There were actually multiple candidates who said that they favored, sort of Colorado style or Illinois style retail marijuana, just legalizing it. So, I don't think we're there yet. And as Adam says, it'll come down to who controls the legislature and those chambers next year. If we have split control, maybe you'll see some sort of interesting compromise on decriminalizing marijuana, but I don't know what the governor will think of that.
There are some legislators who seem to think decriminalizing marijuana would be a good idea. In fact, I think the Senate moved legislation on that this year, but it never went anywhere in the House. The governor has been sort of resisting anything, and she's said that she would never sign a bill to make recreational marijuana legal in Iowa. Going back to the racial justice, one of the things that I've heard repeatedly from federal candidates is sort of using the Iowa legislature as an example and saying we need to do things the Iowa way, where the legislature unanimously approved the racial profiling or not racial profiling, but the racial justice bill that banned chokeholds and addressed other issues. And so it's sort of giving them an out just to, say, hey, we should do it like Iowa did, and without really developing any sort of a policy position of their own.
I would just add that the governor said that she's against legalizing marijuana, but I think probably difficult to see this election season, but if there was a Democratic House and Senate, her incentives would be different. And also now that we're in a pandemic budgeting era where there's just not going to be as many revenues to go around. And also where, we've realized during the pandemic that we don't need this many prisoners either. Drug criminals aren't a huge portion of the people in prison, but drug crimes lead to other crimes that lead to prison sentences. We've realized that we can't afford to have as many prisons and as busy prisons as we do, but two, that we don't need to. The public safety is not necessarily impacted by not having done it. So I remain hopeful that the case can be made to do more on police reform, not just on marijuana, not just on drugs, but on decriminalization of everything, and just not relying so much on police. In Iowa City, at least, they've said that they've altered policing during the pandemic. That police aren't necessarily doing as many, pulling over, running radar, things like that. And so I think coming out of this, we're going to have a lot of information, a lot of different models and studies about how policing can change. And I think that hopefully we're at a part where we're ready for it, and that even people who have opposed what they might call radical ideas in the past, I think can be brought around on some of them.
I wanted to get into, go ahead, Todd.
I was just going to say, Adam wrote for tomorrow, and he can describe it, about how the Cedar Rapids police chief is saying that he will lobby for decriminalization, and if the police get involved, that could turn the tide.
You should just read it tomorrow. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, that's a teaser.
Looking forward to it.
Big teaser.
I wanted to hit on a couple of questions asked by folks online here related to our actual voting, and just, as many people have been getting mailboxes full of different absentee ballot request forms, it seems like these questions may be rooted in that a little bit. One is, what is the most reliable way to ensure my vote is counted, in person or by mail? Two, do you feel that Secretary of State Paul Pate will have an opportunity to actually change the way we count ballots for this general election? So I'll leave it to you guys, which one of those you might want to hit on.
I would just say briefly that they're both safe. I plan to go to my auditor's office, but they're both safe ways to vote.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are sort of gravitating toward getting the absentee ballot, filling it out, and then going to the county building and putting it in the drop box outside, and sort of, not that the postal service is not reliable. I mean, there's been a lot of reporting on what's going on with that, but that ballot goes from your hand and straight to the auditor, and that's, that seems like a good strategy.
And I think it's likely that they'll allow auditors to begin counting those absentee ballots earlier this year than has been the policy in the past, because they're expecting such a heavy volume. I think, what did Paul Pate say? Something like it could be 80% of the voting will be done by absentee ballots. And if they wait until Tuesday to start counting those, it's going to be a slow process.
Well, I think, doesn't the Legislative Council meet tomorrow on
Right.
on Pate's proposal to allow them to start opening the envelopes and getting some of that stuff out of the way, and then starting to count on Monday?
Right.
Something like
Right.
that, yeah.
I will
So
say,
we,
it seems very unlikely that we'll have a clear view of results on election night for the presidential race, or for the Senate race, possibly several of the House races in Iowa. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I think that election commissioners want to get this right. They don't want to release any kind of results that might have a bug with them. And so I think that will probably be the new standard now. I don't think we're going to necessarily know a lot of winners on election night.
and that's one thing we've been talking about in the newsroom, about setting the expectations for Gazette readers, that it could be election week. Someone even mentioned election month, just so that people aren't expecting to know that night and then feeling like something is horribly wrong when they don't know by like 10 o'clock that night.
Yeah, that's like one of my first political memories is Bush 2000, of like waking up and like checking the newspaper, and I was like, well, there's no president, so is it anarchy now? Like we forgo a president now. It was not the case. They didn't do it like that.
Yeah, it's,
So-
well, but we'll have exit polls, and they're incredibly reliable, obviously, so we can just go off that.
Well, we've made it exactly 41 minutes into this conversation without mentioning coronavirus, but I think it's time we do talk about that. So the case counts have been going up and down kind of after that surge we saw in August when Iowa's colleges and universities went back into session. What do you guys think, or what are you reading about whether we're going to see another increase now that K through 12 schools, including Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, when they return to in-person classes?
Well, I think there's been a lot of debate over returning to in-person classes. The governor ordered that schools have to do at least 50% of their core subjects in person, and they can create hybrid plans. The Des Moines Public Schools are still sticking to their online only, even though they're in violation of that gubernatorial edict. And so, we've seen cases at schools around the state. It's the state isn't tracking it, so it's anecdotal. There are folks that are trying to track it. Sort of a lot of the, there've been a lot of like, well, we had in Iowa City, the woman who,
The nurse.
yeah, the nurse who was tracking data. We've got a lot of folks in the state that are doing a good job on their own, sort of tracking the stuff and figuring out. The state doesn't always want to, highlight those numbers, because then, it's the pandemic looks worse. But I mean, my own daughter's been going to school. It's worked out okay so far. She feels fairly safe. We haven't had outbreaks, but I think everybody's looking toward winter, which there are a lot of experts saying that this could get worse in the late fall and winter. And I mean, it's not great. When I heard a health reporter on the radio, I think today, talking about that his family had bought a big freezer to put meat in. It's
I
like,
heard that too.
Okay, so I guess if the guy that's talking to the experts all the time is buying himself a big freezer, this is not a good sign.
He was in a foreign country though, wasn't he? They were talking to 3 international reporters.
Yeah, maybe he was in England. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, there's a lot of consternation about, and then, and of course the flu season peaks in cold weather. So that makes sense. And now there's concerns about, with both of those things happening at the same time, how's that gonna shake out? And will we see a huge spike in cases? And so, I mean, that as long as we don't take some of the big steps that are necessary to sort of control this, we're going to see continued uncontrolled spread by various means through, until we get a vaccine that's widely available.
The state's tracking of COVID-19 makes me really wonder about the other record keeping they do. Do they know how much revenue they're collecting? Do they know if taxpayers are actually paying taxes? I mean, when you look at the way they've been keeping track of COVID, it raises a lot of questions. They change their methods on a regular basis, but the picture we're getting doesn't seem to be any more accurate with all the experience we've had and with all the the changes they've made in their tracking. And it's left to people like this nurse in Iowa City and other folks to sort of drill down in the data and say, wait a minute here. The top line numbers aren't showing what people think they're showing.
Well, I mean, they were noticing that cases were being added to days months ago.
Yeah.
And that didn't seem right, obviously. And it turned out that the system was back. Basically, if you took a test in March and then took another one in June and it was positive, they'd count that back in March when you took the original test.
Yeah.
They blame an antiquated system, but it's worth pointing out that the Branstad-Reynolds regime has been in power now since 2011. If the public health systems are antiquated and can't do the job, maybe at some point over those 9 years, someone might have wanted to address that.
Well, it's a case of, or an example of where, everything seemed to be working well, and then you have a pandemic, and it's like, oh gosh, we should have updated this system about 10 years ago, so we would be prepared for this sort of thing. And it's just, the squeaky wheel, economic development, for example, gets the grease, and until you have a pandemic, who cares about public health? Make sure there's plenty of flu vaccine every winter, but nothing serious.
Our pandemic response plan was working perfectly until there was a pandemic to respond to.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned counting revenues. I mean, they just canceled the October revenue estimating conference meeting, which would have been, where we found out how lousy things are from the pandemic economic downturn. So that's been pushed off till after the election, which is sort of, well, it's not just sort of suspect, it's like hugely suspect. But I mean, that's, we still don't have a good budget picture of how this has affected things. All signs are that it probably hasn't been good, but we haven't seen that sort of big look at the numbers that shows where we're headed going in this budget year and then into the legislative session.
The meeting is still on the calendar for October.
Well, that's what I heard, that someone had said it was being canceled, but maybe.
Yeah.
Senator Celsey tweeted yesterday that it was canceled, and then tweeted that she was just kidding or something.
Oh,
Apparently
I
there
thought I read
was
something beyond tweets, but okay. Good.
Maybe that's right. I just know that she said it was on. She said it was off, and then it was on. So I don't know.
Oh, well, good.
I think somebody canceled it on their calendar, and in doing so, canceled it everywhere.
Oh.
It was an outlook crisis.
Yes, an outlook crisis. Exactly. That's what they called it.
Well, it's an antiquated system.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to transition from the conversation about revenue to one about revenue. Sports has been a big flashpoint lately, with the universities poised to lose tens of millions of dollars if they don't play football. And then if they play, there's the question of fans. Iowa State announced today they'll allow 15,000 fans for the October 3rd game against Oklahoma. The athletic director there, Jamie Pollard, he's been really blunt about saying that Iowans need to acknowledge the huge economic role that sports play in the communities. I wanted to see what you guys think about whether the universities are striking the right balance.
I'm glad we're finally getting around to an important topic.
What do you mean?
Sports.
College football.
I mean, sports, Exactly. This is what we live for, right? I don't know.
I mean,
I think it's going to be a very interesting
I'm-
experiment. I think it's great that they're playing, but it like breaks all the rules. They're in close contact. They're not wearing masks. They're breathing hard. Expelling whatever.
Just so you know, the Iowa State players are
if they have a
wearing.
successful season, I think it'll be Oh, they're wearing masks?
Yeah, they are wearing what I think their engineering department developed it. It's called the Cyclone Shield. It's like a plastic thing that goes inside the helmet. So I don't know how effective it is.
Good for them. Good for them. Yeah, it's going to be great. Fans really just, I think, will be a real test of the fans here in Iowa with no mask mandate and a reluctance to keep your distance. Cross your fingers.
It's hard to say what the impact is because you don't know how fans are going to react. So there's not public ticket sales, so attendance at the stadium will be significantly restricted. But people are still going to, you imagine, will get together to watch the game or to do things like that. So it's hard to. I'm not so much worried about the players. I think the players have protection. The players are in a program. I'm worried about what if it leads to more parties and things like that. I think that probably has a bigger public health impact. Before they called on football, some players and advocates were saying, well, it's actually safer for us to be in. If you turn us out to the general population, if there's not football, then that's not actually a good situation for us to be in. But again, I think, Big 10, Big 12 football are huge spectacles. People want to get together and watch them on TV, especially because there's pent up demand for that kind of activity right now. So that's what I would watch for is, do you see these big 200, 500 person parties happening in Iowa City and Ames?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think, Jamie Pollard saw what happened to Iowa State when they played in an empty stadium. So I don't think he wants to let that happen again. I think he thinks they maybe need some fans there to give them a little bit of a home field advantage. What brought the Big Ten back was this idea that you can rigorously test your athletes almost daily and keep tabs on that. And the parents were arguing, as Adam alluded to, that their kids were probably better off within that bubble of the football program being tested and cared for and sort of wanting to make that commitment to keep healthy than they would have been just to sort of be average students out in the campus population. So, and it is money. It's big money. The University of Iowa cut sports, including their more than century-old swimming and diving program. I really wish when they agreed to play football again that they might have put that on hold and then seen how the situation evolved instead of just letting that decision stand. I think the athletic director said today that there's always going to be a villain, and the villain in this case is COVID, not the athletic director apparently, but the virus. So I don't know how many of the swimming and diving people feel that way, but it's they're not going to allow fans at Iowa, at least at first, and the season is going to stretch almost to Christmas, and they're talking about maybe letting fans in, in those later games. I'm a season ticket holder. I don't know how much I want to go and tailgate on December 12th, although, with climate change, maybe it'll be 65 degrees and delightful. But, it's, I think a lot of people are happy to have this little slice of normalcy back, but we'll see how it goes. And we'll see how 15,000 people fare at Jack Trice.
So speaking of kind of this frequent testing or rapid testing, why aren't more colleges and universities doing the rapid testing that's being done at places like the University of Illinois? We're just not seeing that in a widespread way.
Good question. I don't know. I think that was, it seems like an obvious part that you would have planned for. I think maybe by the time, that was a proven model after other campuses had done it on campus, they didn't have, the time or resources to ramp that up mid-semester, but it seems like an obvious thing you would have wanted to do early on. In some cases, you almost get the sense that certain people don't want to know who has COVID because then they would have to, deal with it. So I don't know. It seems like there's not just one approach to doing things safe. There's multiple ways to do things safely during a pandemic, but it seems like one way to check a lot of boxes is to test most people most days that they're around. And that's not what they've chosen to do at the colleges.
Well, and that's what the health experts have been telling us basically from the beginning is we need to do more testing, more testing, more testing. And we've, the people in charge of that sort of thing have resisted it for a variety of reasons, whether it's, like Adam said, it's better not to know if you have a problem, or it's because of the cost, or just indifference. But yeah, I mean, we should be doing more testing every day, and not just football players, but everybody.
So a question that came in, I believe this came in through email before the event tonight from Diana Drummer. She asked, after viewing my sample ballot online, I saw that there's a statewide ballot measure which asks the question about a convention to revise Iowa's constitution. She wants to know who got this on the ballot and what they might want to change.
Well, the Iowa Constitution requires every 10 years that they ask voters, that voters be asked whether they want to do a constitutional convention. And this is 2020, so we're in the 10-year cycle. And James could correct me, or Adam too. I don't believe there's anybody campaigning for this or against it necessarily, but
yeah,
there's right-wing groups that perpetually advocate
Sure.
for this. There might be left-wing group there. Well, so there actually are left-wing groups that want to put limits on money in politics that have entertained this idea, flirted with this idea. I think most mainstream thinkers on either side say that this, they call it kind of a dangerous idea because there's not really bounds to what that convention could do. There's even talk of, a convention could rewrite its own, just throw out the Constitution. So there's, I don't know how that would work in practice. There's other legal scholars who say that that's not true, that there are bounds on it. So generally, it's kind of fringe. I'll say fringe people because I don't have a problem with fringe people. I'm one of them, but it's usually fringe people who bring up this kind of thing. As far as I know, there's no, group that's associated with the mainstream political parties that are lobbying for this year.
yeah,
there's always calls in the legislature to have convention or to address various constitutional issues, whether it's gun rights, abortion, money in politics. These are the things. The thinking of a lot of legislative leaders has been, like Todd said, it's dangerous to have this one because you don't know what could happen. You don't know where it's going. There really are no limits. And for every good idea you have, there could be a lot of Iowans out there who have their own good ideas. And I don't know that anything would get done because they would be fighting with whoever is participating in this convention would be fighting with each other. But I don't know that we've ever had
There have been ballot issues before. I mean, actually, put on the ballot with real campaigns in favor. Yeah.
Okay.
But this seems like a bad time to pop the hood on the Constitution. And Democrats might be wary because if the Republicans retain control, it's basically the legislature that decides how the Constitutional Convention, how the delegates are selected and how that all works out. So if it's one party control again, it might be something that your more liberal voters would not feel welcome to see.
Well, we're nearing the end of our hour here, and as I said during our June event, I feel like when I start getting an hour on Zoom, I start getting antsy, and I think maybe other people are in the same boat. And we know people might want to, make some popcorn before the debate at 7 p.m. So we're going to wrap up here.
Drink.
or making themselves a drink. Adam, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, can I just say real quick that folks can sign up now for the Iowa Ideas Conference, which is October 15th and 16th. And it's since it's all virtual this year, it's free, but it is the same quality programming as we offer at our previous Iowa Ideas conferences. So if you go to thegazette.com, there's a link on there, or search for, you can go to iowaideas.com as well, and it'll direct you over.
That's awesome. I was going to point that out too. I'm really excited about the conference. I mean, some of the panelists that we have lined up are really exciting. And we even retooled some of our programming after the derecho and are going to be talking about rebuilding the energy grid, restoring the tree canopy. There's going to be a lot of exciting topics there. And since it's free, you can kind of just register and like pop on for a couple of sessions without feeling like you have to be there for the entire thing to get your money's worth. So I think it's going to be a great offering. James, were you going to say something, add something there?
I was just going to add that because it's virtual, you can spend, all day on Zoom, hours and hours.
Yeah.
I have a question for James. Since when I think of Iowa Ideas, I think of your Iowa Ideas T-shirt over a necktie. we probably won't get that for this year's, will we?
I could do it just for you. That makes me think that the first Pints and Politics we did during this pandemic, I promised Quinn that I would shave and put on pants. I just want to assure everyone that I am wearing pants.
Yeah. Well, there's one of us.
Wouldn't the T-shirt over the shirt and tie, would that be called the Branstead? Because I think I've seen him do that a lot.
Yeah, he did that.
Yeah.
I didn't have him in mind when I did that. But yes.
That's what happens when you get a free T-shirt at an event, right? And then you have to put on. Yeah. Well, and then just so you guys know, so our listeners know, our next virtual Pints and Politics is October 29th. Then we can rehash everything with the general election. It's going to be, interesting to see what happens. So
and we'll all be in costume because it'll be almost Halloween.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, until then, thanks. See you all.
Thanks, everybody.